Hey Dana, great having you at Step 2026 and at Podster as well. What brings you here?
First of all, thank you. Thank you for hosting me. I'm always happy to see Podster in random places.
I know it's...
and at these events. It's brilliant. What brings me here? Well, I was invited to be part of a panel and facilitate a conversation around retention of attention. What is it that really gets people to pay attention? I think it was Gary Vee that said that attention is the new currency of the world that we all need to be paying attention to.
Well, it's interesting that probably, let's say, a couple of years ago, I mean, if you say something like that, people will be like, oh, what do you mean?
Yeah.
But what do you actually mean by that? But I mean, this year we mean it, right? We absolutely mean attention is retention of attention, the attention economy. So maybe elaborate a little bit more about how do we take attention these days, what attention economy means, what creators economy mean for some B2B audiences that might actually not think this way yet.
Sure. Well, I think what's interesting about our shift in perspective when it comes to attention is I think it used to be viewed as a cheap commodity that you would almost have to perform to achieve. And while I still think that there's an element of performance to getting attention today that still exists, I think it's a lot more strategic and calculated when it comes to the communication and storytelling space.
I like the word intentional. Yeah, it's a lot more intentional than it used to be.
100%.
Compared to the strategy, yes, 100%. Definitely. Yeah.
And it's interesting because the people that we had on our panel was someone that came from the kind of traditional media background. So they provided screens that are inside elevators. And then we had someone who was more platform publishing, and we had someone that actually worked with creators, so micro and nano influencers. And what was interesting about the way that the conversation went, there was a lot of friction around this idea of who represents the more relevant entity in today's kind of communication ecosystem.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of conversation around this idea of what qualifies as attention, and is it something that is worthy of creating or renting? And what are kind of the metrics? What is the new measurement of metrics? It used to be about impressions and visibility and likes, but in today's kind of creator economy, it's something a lot deeper. It's about memory. It's about potentially changing perspective. It's about changing behavior. It's a lot more powerful in the way that it works today. And it's interesting when people think about it, not just from a strategic perspective, but when they think about it from the perspective of how is it going to build on the way they tell their stories today.
No, I love it. I mean, I love the shift that is happening. And so what's your biggest take on the panel and overall? You are a creator yourself, right? You're also a person who's got a business ecosystem behind your content, and not necessarily straight away monetizing the attention that you're getting through your content, but building something else on the back end. So what's your biggest take on this shift? You fairly mentioned the measurement is different. You fairly mentioned that we define attention in a different way, but I'm interested, do you think the attention that as we define it these days, is it worth fighting for?
So I think, look, when it comes to myself and the way that I'm trying to quote unquote capture attention, I'm in it for the long game. So I have come to an understanding that for me to garner the kind of attention that will help me scale my business later, I need to garner credibility first. And that's a slow game. It's not something that happens quickly. So my journey is a little bit different compared to how kind of more traditional social media creators function. Both valid, it's just different strategies. I think what was interesting about today's conversation was there was a lot of debate on the role that AI is playing in facilitating the creation of content, in facilitating the distribution of content, and how much it becomes part of operationally how businesses function. And there was a little bit of tension around this idea of, some people viewed it as, they're not mutually exclusive, when the way I see it is that for us to really optimize and retain attention, you need to be able to see them as, it's not a zero-sum game. We need both. I don't think we're in an age where people are ready to let go of human connection. I think it's something that gives you credibility, gets attention. It is something that is a lot more earned over time. That's where storytelling stems from. And that's where I think the inspiration for what makes our human experiences unique and incredible and worthy of attention, it all starts there with human interaction. But AI also plays a very serious role in how we are going to be operating moving forward. Its ability to generate content, to generate imagery and visuals, to move us. I do want to acknowledge that AI will have the capacity to move us, whether it's through storytelling, whether it's through visuals, whether it's through the way we interact with brands. I do think we are heading towards an era where that is going to happen, but I don't think it's going to happen in isolation of human connection, insightful human interactions, and really it's about integrating both those things.
In fact, I think the integration of AI, I mean, there has been very little talks about AI these days, by the way, in this studio.
Really?
Yes, it's an interesting shift in the narrative, because people would like to have a balance. Even in the conversations that we're having, we need to analyze for real, where's the space for humans. And we all know that AI is just a different language that we need to adopt. But there has been so much AI narrative in the previous years, but that I think there's a big requirement for us to actually rebalance it with what you name as human connection, and what you fairly mentioned, that we're not ready to let go the actual human element. In fact, I think the amount of AI makes the human element and the human connection a lot more valuable than it used to be.
100%.
And a lot more exclusive, I would say. No, but I think what you're saying is absolutely invaluable, because first of all, I like the interpretation, the new understanding of attention. So I call it's a market, it's a new way to do your marketing, regardless of what space you're in, whether you're in B2B, in B2C, consumer sort of brands. I mean, attention is something that you can convert into your marketing strategy. I mean, can you even do the marketing these days without the attention?
Yeah, no. I think where most people are going to fall short when it comes to the B2B community, or any community that's trying to advertise to any audience, is when you dismiss a channel thinking that it's something that is no longer relevant to communities. I think that so many channels in a customer's journey, in a touch point journey, which, it's something that we used to use a lot when it came to the way that we planned media, but I think it's still valid today. What has changed is the additional channels that have been added to this entire journey. And I think to dismiss any of them as irrelevant would make you miss out as a brand. There was a very interesting parallel I drew with the person that was their supplier of the digital media screens inside elevators. And we were talking about who they compete with. And what was interesting is that they're not competing with billboard ads and digital ads. They're competing with the phones that people are holding when they're in an elevator during that dwell time. But there's something interesting to be said about, if we know that that's going to be a key part of a customer's journey, how are we going to not just disrupt, but get the attention of a user that has dismissed this medium completely, but this medium has the potential to influence, because again, this person is spending time there.
Yeah.
This is a valuable opportunity. So how do we start to get creative about how we can get attention, how we can retain attention? I think visibility for brands is going to be very, very key, but I think the way they are visible is something that is going to change. That's why we talk about storytelling as a big kind of component of the way that we communicate to these brands in today's world.
Absolutely. So, and one of the facts, for example, I've heard recently, that Gap, for example, that was during the 1 billion followers summit, and that was probably the biggest confession. Gap hired a chief entertainment officer, not a chief marketing officer, not a chief content officer, a chief entertainment officer. That's to your point. How do we utilize our visibility? How do we create? How do we address our visibility? Can we just become visible with the same narrative as we used to have, the same creative as we used to have? Most probably not.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think a big mistake that brands make specifically on that point is that they rush to get the attention without investing enough time in figuring out what they want to say about themselves. What is the story that they want people to remember? So it starts to become a very tactical, transactional experience that is short-lived, and then they're disappointed when it comes to the way that it's measured. People don't retain the information. People are not looking at them as a memorable brand or experience because it's easy to replace them, because they were going for, again, that short-term disruption versus something a lot more considered, intentional, and long-term.
So how to create a story for a brand these days? And we used to use the word storytelling for years. Did we really mean it? I don't think so. I mean, storytelling probably meant when books were relevant, but storytelling in marketing for years didn't mean anything, almost anything, right? Because most of the brand narratives were the same.
Yeah.
Is there a space for the real storytelling behind it? No. But now, I mean, platforms like YouTube, creators who grew on YouTube actually pushed brands to think differently about what storytelling is. So what do you think makes a great story for a brand?
I think, first of all, where brands fall short when it comes to storytelling is rooted in them thinking that there's a formula to it, okay? And the minute you try to attach a mathematical formula to something as intuitive as storytelling, I think that's when you kill it. That's when you kill the resonance. And the whole point of storytelling is to generate resonance. We want this to move people in some way. What's interesting, and the way that I've approached it in the writer's room that I've set up, in the strategies we develop, even in the IP that we're developing at my company, is we look for tension. Tension does not mean problem, okay? Tension, what it is it's an opportunity to invite questioning, an opportunity to invite reflection, an opportunity to stimulate people in a different way with what you share with them, what message you share with them. So I feel like for me, when it comes to storytelling today, a core part of where ideation begins is not with the audience and what they want, because if we're just replicating that, then okay, congratulations. It's a very saturated kind of space.
Absolutely, yes.
But if you invest in understanding what are those tension points that you can tap into to tell a different type of story that is relevant to your brand, because again, tension is not about also just creating problems. It's not about conflict. Thank you. It's not about conflict. Tension is not about conflict. It's about evoking something. It's about sentiment. It's about moving people. And that is what storytelling is about. And we respond to that as humans. And that cannot be replicated in AI. So yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in this case, AI probably serves as an automation to some extent, and for faster production purposes, but definitely the relevance and evaluating the outcomes of those tensions. I mean, you can't do it without a human, because we know what's going on the ground. We feel those tensions, right? In our relationship every day. I think it's a very relevant conversation that we're having, because it's the time for businesses to look into storytelling and attention specifically in a totally different way, right? And take it as part of their marketing, take it as a responsibility.
Yeah.
So we discussed what makes a great story for the brand. Let's talk a little bit more, because I think you mentioned an interesting part, how the attention can be measured and how those measurements have shifted from how we used to measure traditional media, for example. So can you elaborate a little bit more on the metrics side?
Look, I think metrics matter when you have an honest conversation with yourself as a brand or as a brand owner around what success means for your business. A lot of the time, what people have multiple objectives when it comes to anything that they invest money in. I want visibility, I want reach, I want follows, I want them to buy this. You can't have it all at the same time. You can have it all, just not at the same time. And I think this is a very important thing that people need to understand. As an example, if we were to look at conferences, sometimes people would judge a conference by the footfall, the volume of people that are attending a conference versus the quality of the interactions and the networking and the decisions that happened at a specific conference. Both can be argued as successful metrics,
Yeah.
but which one matters to the brand? That's the conversation that needs to be had. So I think that when it comes to the way things are measured, before that, what needs to happen is a decision needs to be made on what success means for whatever you're investing in.
No, I agree with you that the metrics overall have to be relooked. I mean, I understand that the marketing people are usually facing a lot of operational, pressure to fit in to the old systems that require them to have views, require them to have subscribers, and require them to report on the campaigns and on the activities that they invested into in an old way. But we're already a step ahead, and so the systems need to change, and
The systems need to change, but I also want to add, you and I were having a conversation recently about this idea of longevity. And I feel like I can relate it to the way that marketing teams and communication generally works in corporate environments or with brands. There is this struggle or consistent fear that brands need to fight to last forever, okay? And what's interesting is that they think that sits in the space where we have to put in a lot of money into something, or we just have to repeat what we're doing in a bigger way. And I don't necessarily think that's the case. I think what brands and corporate environments need to learn is adaptability, agility. That is a skill I feel is very much lacking in the communication space today, even in terms of storytelling, because if I were to remember, I'm sure you remember this, there was a time not long ago, 10 years, where we used to talk about radio as a dead medium. Today, the amount of podcasts that come out of this city alone is insane.
Yeah.
And what podcasting has done to the communication environment is very similar to what radio used to do for that generation. To assume that things are not going to change and we just have to, consistently, keep running and investing in a lot of the same and not be prepared to adapt to change as it comes, because it's going to continue. Today, the fear is around AI, but it's going to become something else. You know what I mean? I think that's an important skill to keep in mind when it comes to the way that we communicate and the strategies we implement.
And I think also you fairly mentioned that the narrative cannot stay the same with the same brand forever. I mean, you don't have to be the same brand, because you're also going through different cycles of your development. I mean, there's certain risk not to address your narrative for sure. If you're a small company and you think that it's not part of your priorities to address your narrative, okay, good luck. Most probably somebody will interpret your values easily. Same is happening, let's say, at the prime stage when your company is big enough, and so you probably, the risk of sounding incorrect become bigger than the actual sense and meaning that you're sharing, and then you become irrelevant.
You become irrelevant because you see risk as something that's going to hurt your business, when in reality, and this is something funny enough, we've learned from the influencer community. When influencers build communities and audiences, they carry those audiences with them on their journey. So as the influencer evolves and changes, its audience evolves and changes with it. And of course, there are going to be people that drop off. There are going to be new people that come in at different cycles. I don't think brands have used that insight to their advantage yet. I think they're so attached to 100-year-old institutional thinking where they're very scared to pivot. And I think that is what's going to keep people behind.
What do you think needs to happen to break the ice with the brands? Because I do see the tendency of bigger brands and probably medium level brands going into podcasting, tapping into that space, trying to personalize their marketing. And I think that's a great place to start your media narrative, let's say. But what do you think needs to happen that this space is disrupted massively?
I think that people that work in this space need to humble themselves when it comes to the role that they play and the person that they are. One thing that I find incredibly strange, I was sitting with a very senior executive working in the broadcasting world, and this person was proudly telling me that they are not consumers of content. And I was like, so what are you doing in the broadcast world? Like, why is that a badge of honor?
You have to watch.
You have to watch.
Yeah.
So when it comes to communication channels, if you're isolating yourself and you're not an active user, and when I say active user, that means I am participating. It doesn't necessarily mean that I become the brand, but I am someone who is learning from the experience of posting, learning from the algorithm, understanding the challenges. If I am not immersing myself in that, I have no business being part of this industry. And I think to understand that and invest in that, and by the way, I also want to say, this is not an age specific thing. I hear so many people saying, oh yeah, it's just about hiring younger. No, absolutely not. It has nothing to do with age. It has to do with mindset. People that have open mindsets and are open to learning and open to experimentation are more likely to stay in the game for the long haul than the people that are attached to their way of thinking.
But I think we've reached the point when it comes to, let's say, brand, just because I work a lot with the brands, and I used to work in marketing, and I was always on a mission to bring in something more exciting into how we create content as businesses, but it has always been extremely difficult. But I think we've reached the point where we can't stand it anymore. I mean, the revolution has to happen in terms of the content. You either do not do content at all, or if you're doing the content as a brand, you need to do it the modern way. You need to do it the way that the audiences are talking these days, because if you're using the language that nobody speaks, I mean, what's the point of investing into that? And I think that's a very important conversation, frankly speaking, very disruptive one, quite emotional as well. But I think that's it is meant to be. Let's touch upon a little bit of an IP.
Sure.
As I told you, a year ago, I would probably not be even interested or even curious about what IP is. I didn't know. But this year, somehow I sensed that there's something about these two letters that needs to be learned a lot more. And I did my research, so IP is the next big thing, but I will allow you to elaborate on that, please.
So IP, I mean, fundamentally has always existed, okay? It's just now a sexy word that the industry uses a lot. I think what has changed is the conversation around ownership of IP. And I think that's the game of today and tomorrow. When it comes to creators, they're no longer trying to fit into a system, they're creating their own systems. So when it comes to IP, essentially what it is it's a way of doing something. And a way of doing something could be a format, it could be a story, it could be your name, it could be a character. But for that to happen, for it to become actual IP, there needs to be a significant investment in it. And investment isn't necessarily just monetary. It's the investment of time in building that brand, that time in producing it properly, that time in building the credibility and the audience that, makes that IP worth something. And then we start to get into the commoditization of that IP. So that is why I think it's a buzzword today, and it's an important word, and it's a word that a lot of people need to be thinking about, understanding, learning about, and humbling themselves when it comes to it, because I also think we're moving into an era where just because you are bigger and older as a brand or as an entity or even as an investor, that doesn't mean that you own the exclusive IP. And we've seen that disrupt the music industry. I think one of the biggest stories was the Taylor Swift story when she wanted to own her own masters and she wasn't able to do that, and there was an issue around that. So really, ownership of IP is something key to be on the lookout for, because it is going to change the way that this ecosystem, this industry functions.
Absolutely, and I think you also mentioned very important, if you're a big brand, it doesn't mean, first of all, that you're owning the attention. You're not necessarily owning the attention and the IP. So there's a big game about how it is being distributed in the space of attention. We could continue that conversation definitely in a lot deeper way, probably. We just sort of highlighted it a little bit, but I'm happy that you facilitated the a few messages that were very, very important, and you obviously are sort of studying that space as well. So I'm happy to continue that conversation outside STEP as well.
Absolutely, absolutely.
How did you find the STEP so far this year?
Honestly, I loved it. I love, going back to this initial word that we started with, intentionality. I feel like everyone here is here with the mindset of connecting, scaling, and also very much seeking insights, not necessarily advice, but really insights on the region, the founders, the businesses. There's so much curiosity that exists here, and I think that's what makes this conference incredibly different from other conferences. People aren't here to just, show off what they've done or what they can do. I think they come here with a shared mindset of genuine curiosity, and they're very ready to kind of share and receive, which is quite nice.
I love it. I think that's the biggest insight, and that's a wrap for this year of year of interviews. And yeah, I love it.
Thank you for
so much,
having
yeah.
me. It was
Thanks
a
for
pleasure to
stopping
be
by,
here.
Yeah.